Picture this, right? Your phone buzzes on the kitchen counter.
Okay.
You look down, you see their name flash on the screen, and instantly your stomach just drops.
Yeah, that visceral reaction.
Exactly. I mean, they haven't even said a single word to you yet, but your body is already sounding this massive blaring alarm.
Right.
And on paper, this person is, they're fine. They aren't screaming at you. They don't throw things.
It would look perfectly normal to the outside world.
Completely normal. But every single time you interact with them, you walk away feeling just entirely drained. You feel this lingering, kind of suffocating sense of guilt or this vague nagging idea that you've somehow done something wrong.
Right, like you're always one step behind.
Yeah. Yet if you tried to explain it to a friend, you'd sound petty. You'd say, well, they sighed heavily when I said I was tired, or they subtly reminded me how much they paid for dinner last week.
Which sounds like nothing out loud.
It sounds like nothing, but inside your nervous system, it feels like an absolute psychological war zone.
Well, that intense physical reaction, the sudden drop in your stomach, that tightness in your chest, that is not you being overly sensitive.
That's not.
No, absolutely not. That is a highly sophisticated, evolutionary somatic alarm system.
Wow.
Your body is detecting a profound psychological threat that your conscious, rational mind it just hasn't been able to categorize yet.
So your body literally knows before your brain does.
Exactly.
Well, today we're going to expose the invisible operating system of the exact people who trigger that alarm.
We really need to get into this.
We're taking you inside the architecture of manipulation, coercive control, and the people who quietly use your own vulnerability as a weapon against you.
It's a dark place to go, but it's so necessary.
It is. Our mission over the course of this deep dive is to give you, the listener, basically a behavioral profiling masterclass.
Right.
We want to help you decode these hidden clues so you can recognize patterns of covert narcissism and boundary violations that most people never see.
Even after decades of exposure, honestly.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
Because the individuals we are profiling today, they rarely wear a villain's mask,
Right. They don't look like the bad guy in a movie.
No, they don't announce their toxic intentions. Instead, they operate as psychological predators who camouflage themselves.
Camouflage how?
By exploiting the most fundamental, beautiful human desire we possess, the desire for connection and attachment.
Wow. So they use our own good nature against us.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But by the end of our analysis, you are going to possess the operating manual to spot these breaches, dissect them in real time, and neutralize them completely.
I love that. And to build this manual, we are pulling together a massive synthesis of clinical psychology, behavioral forensics, trauma research, and family systems theory.
It's a huge stack of data.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are integrating the foundational work of Dr. Harriet Lerner, the boundary principles from Dr. Henry Cloud, Annie Wright's research on toxic family systems, and extensive clinical literature on codependency and narcissistic personality disorder.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We are going to peel this dynamic back layer by layer, starting from the observable behaviors on the surface, all the way down to the unconscious drivers, and the terrifying long-term somatic toll on the victim.
So, if we're going to understand how a predator operates, we first have to understand the specific environment they're looking to exploit, right?
Right, because they don't just target anyone randomly, do they?
Not at all. They are looking for a highly specific structural weakness. And that environment, that weakness, is your personal boundary system.
Now, the word boundary gets thrown around a lot in pop psychology.
Oh, constantly.
Usually just as a synonym for, saying no.
Right, like it's just a stop sign.
Yeah, but the clinical literature describes it as something much more complex. It isn't just a brick wall you build around yourself.
No, it's a vital, dynamic mechanism for preserving your individual autonomy.
The American Psychological Association actually defines it as a psychological demarcation that protects your integrity.
I love that definition.
It's the invisible line that separates your thoughts, your motives, and your emotions from the people around you.
Think of it as your psychological immune system.
Okay, an immune system. Walk me through that.
Well, just as your biological immune system has to constantly decide which cells belong to you and which are foreign invaders that need to be neutralized,
Right.
your psychological boundaries are tasked with filtering out emotional contagion, manipulation, and unreasonable demands.
Wow.
And just like an immune system, boundaries exist on a continuum.
Yeah.
They can be heavily underactive or they can be entirely overactive.
Let's examine that continuum, because this is where I think the targeting really begins. At one extreme, the literature identifies porous boundaries.
Yes, the underactive immune system.
Right. A person with porous boundaries fundamentally prioritizes connection over protection.
Always.
They are the ones who overshare deeply personal trauma within 5 minutes of meeting a stranger on a bus.
hmm Or they have an actual physical inability to refuse a request.
Yeah, and they absorb the emotional weather of whatever room they walk into. Like if their partner is angry, they instantly feel responsible for fixing it.
Right. Or if their boss is stressed out, they take on extra work totally unprompted just to smooth things over.
Exactly. So that's porous. But on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have rigid boundaries,
Right, which is the overactive immune system.
where the individual prioritizes protection over connection to an almost pathological degree.
They build massive, impenetrable emotional walls.
Yeah, they avoid intimacy, they refuse to ask for help even when they are literally drowning, and they just keep everyone at arm's length.
And we should note, this almost always develops as a severe defense mechanism following profound trauma, abandonment, or betrayal.
So their brain has basically learned that connection equals destruction.
Exactly. It's a trauma response.
Right. But the ultimate goal, the gold standard we are all striving for, is flexible boundaries.
Yes.
This means you have conscious, intentional control over what you let in and what you keep out.
You could open the door for a trusted friend and slam it shut for a toxic coworker.
But the nuances of this are far deeper. Psychologist Nina Brown introduces a highly specific model with 4 boundary typologies that really eliminates the exact profile these manipulators are hunting for.
This specific typology is so crucial for understanding the behavioral profiling aspect of abuse.
She breaks them down into soft, spongy, rigid, and flexible. Let's start with soft.
A soft boundary is essentially a merging boundary.
Uh-huh.
The individual has virtually zero psychological immune system.
0.
Yeah. They blur the lines between themselves and others so completely that they don't even know where their own preferences end and their partners begin.
Like adopting the hobbies of whoever they're dating.
Hobbies, political views, emotional states, everything. For someone with narcissistic personality disorder, a person with a soft boundary is the ultimate limitless supply of energy.
Because they offer absolutely 0 friction. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet for a predator. But what about the spongy boundary? Because this one fascinated me. I think it describes a huge portion of the population who might not even realize they are at risk.
Yeah, spongy boundaries are very common. It's a fragile combination of soft and rigid.
How does that work?
The person is fundamentally unsure of what to let in and what to keep out, which permits moderate emotional contagion.
So they have some walls, but they're leaky.
Right. And the reason a spongy boundary forms is usually due to inconsistent childhood environments.
Okay.
The person tries to protect themselves, so they build a wall.
Mm.
Maybe they are incredibly rigid and organized about their daily schedule at work.
Right?
But because the foundation of that wall is insecure, the moment someone applies the right emotional pressure,
Like a mother guilt-tripping them about money?
yes, or a partner playing the victim, when that specific pressure is applied, that wall instantly turns to a sponge and absorbs the manipulation.
So the manipulator is actively walking through the world, scanning their environment for these specific soft and spongy traits,
It's a radar system for them.
like an unconscious, continuous risk-reward calculation.
Yes. The manipulator will drop a tiny, seemingly innocent comment just to see if it penetrates,
Give me an example.
like a passive-aggressive sigh or a backhanded compliment about what you're wearing.
Okay.
If it bounces off a flexible or rigid boundary, like if you just ignore it or set a limit,
Mm.
the manipulator quickly moves on.
They don't want the fight.
Exactly. They do not want to expend the energy required to break down a secure system.
But if the comment is absorbed,
Right. If the target apologizes unnecessarily or starts over-explaining themselves,
the predator instantly knows they have found a spongy boundary.
they found their mark.
Now, I want to introduce a metaphor here, but I actually want to push back on it immediately.
Okay, let's hear it.
If having a soft or spongy boundary is like leaving the front door of your house wide open and maybe even like setting a fresh pie on the windowsill to attract a burglar, aren't we placing an unfair amount of focus on the homeowner? Why is all the psychological literature focused on fixing the victim's boundaries rather than diagnosing why the burglar is breaking in the first place?
That is the exact question that torments trauma survivors.
It has to.
They constantly ask their therapist, why do I have to do all this exhausting internal work when they're the ones abusing me? Why is it my responsibility?
Right. It feels like victim blaming.
And the clinical truth is, the moral culpability lies entirely,
Right.
100%, with with the manipulator.
Period.
Period.
Yeah.
The violation is their fault. However, and this is a big however, if we move from the realm of morality into the realm of pragmatism and behavioral realities, we have to acknowledge a terrifying truth.
Which is?
We cannot change the burglar.
Because the burglar is operating on an entirely different psychological architecture.
Precisely. Manipulators, specifically those exhibiting traits of narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personalities, they fundamentally lack the neural and psychological architecture to view you as a separate, autonomous human being with your own inherent rights.
That is so hard for a normal person to grasp.
It is. Because they do not look at you and see a person. They look at you and see an appliance.
An appliance?
They view people as objects, as functional extensions of themselves designed to fulfill their internal needs.
Which the clinical literature refers to as narcissistic supply.
Right.
So it's like if your toaster suddenly decided it didn't want to make toast today because it was tired, you wouldn't empathize with the toaster.
No, you wouldn't.
You would hit the toaster until it worked, or you would throw it away and get a new one.
That is a harsh but incredibly accurate behavioral equivalent of how the covert manipulator views their target.
That's chilling. So appealing to their sense of fairness or trying to get them to understand how much they are hurting you?
It is an exercise in utter futility.
You're waiting for an emotional awakening that can't happen.
You are waiting for an apology that is structurally impossible for them to deliver. Therefore, securing the house, rebuilding your own boundary architecture from spongy to flexible is the only viable real-world defense you possess.
That makes the stakes incredibly clear. So let's look at the actual mechanics of the break-in.
Okay.
If we know they are looking for that open door, how exactly do they step inside without triggering our conscious alarms?
Right.
Because if they walked up to us on day one and just screamed in our face, we would call the police and run.
The psychological immune system would immediately reject them.
Exactly. So how do they get past it?
They bypass the alarm system by keeping the initial breaches incredibly small. And this brings us to the first two layers of our analysis: observable behaviors and emotional strategy.
Okay.
Manipulators specialize in insidious microaggressions to test the waters.
We need to put on our forensic profiler hats right here.
Let's do it.
I want to break down a specific layered case study synthesized from the source material. We'll call this the migraine scenario.
This is a classic one.
Let's say you have a severe migraine. You're supposed to go to a planned, non-essential dinner with your partner, but you are in excruciating physical agony.
Right, a real biological limit.
You tell your partner, "I'm so sorry, I have a blinding migraine. I need to skip dinner and rest in a dark room."
And this is a textbook example of a perfectly healthy, reasonable assertion of a boundary.
Right. But your partner doesn't respond with empathy. They don't say, "Oh no, feel better, I'll go alone."
No.
Instead, their face drops. They sigh heavily. They stare at you with this intense disappointment. And they say, "Wow, after everything I've done for you this week, you can't just push through for one night."
Oh, wow.
Let's freeze that exact moment. I want us to do a forensic, line-by-line breakdown of the psychological warfare happening in that 5-second exchange.
Okay, let's dissect it. First, what was literally said. The text is, "After all I do for you, you can't push through for one night."
Second, what was actually meant? What is the hidden subtext there?
The subtext is, "Your severe physical pain is completely subordinate to my immediate desire for your presence, your compliance, and my public image at this dinner."
Third, what specific emotional response was targeted in the victim?
Guilt. Obligation. The sudden, overwhelming feeling that you owe a massive debt to this person and that the only acceptable currency to repay that debt is abandoning your own physical needs.
And fourth, and I think this is the most critical piece for the profiling manual, what invisible transaction just took place if you give in, take some painkillers, and force yourself to go to the dinner?
If you go, you have just traded your bodily autonomy for their temporary conditional approval.
Wow.
You have communicated, not with your words but with your behavior, that your physical pain is a negotiable boundary.
You literally just handed them the master key to your psychological house.
You did, because the manipulator has successfully gathered vital intelligence on you.
Date.
Yes. They now know that if they apply the specific emotional lever of guilt regarding past favors, you will override your own biological limits to appease them.
That is a highly successful operation for them.
Very successful. They will log that vulnerability and use it repeatedly.
It's chilling when you strip away the romantic or familial context and view it purely as behavioral data collection.
It really is.
And the clinical literature lists several other covert violations that operate on this exact same frequency. Unsolicited advice is a massive one that people rarely recognize as abuse.
Unsolicited advice is a brilliant camouflage because it masquerades as deep care.
Right. They always say, I'm just trying to help you.
Exactly. But repeatedly offering opinions or feedback you did not ask for, especially regarding how you dress, how you parent, or how you do your job, is actually a covert method of establishing dominance.
How does that establish dominance, though? It just seems annoying.
It is a continuous, subtle assertion that your problem-solving processes are inferior to theirs.
Oh, wow.
It communicates, I know what is best for your life better than you do. And over years, this erodes the victim's trust in their own competence.
So they start checking with the manipulator before making even minor decisions.
Exactly, which creates a profound state of dependency.
Another subtle tactic is the persistent disregard for a no, treating your refusal not as a boundary, but as the opening bid in a negotiation.
Yes, the constant haggling over boundaries.
Like you say, I'm not comfortable talking about my finances right now. And they immediately counter with, well, we're family. We just need to figure it out quickly. You shouldn't be so secretive.
They completely bypass the conversational boundary you just set. By forcing you to defend your no, they keep you engaged in their game.
And we also see this play out in physical space, like standing uncomfortably close to someone to deliberately trigger their startle response.
Or something deeply ingrained in many toxic family dynamics. Forcing a young child to hug or kiss an adult relative when the child is clearly shrinking away and saying no.
I read that section of the source material on child enmeshment, and it is devastating.
It's horrible.
By forcing that hug, you are actively dismantling the child's somatic alarm system.
They really are.
You are teaching them that their physical autonomy, their fundamental human right to dictate who touches their own body, must be surrendered instantly to appease an adult's ego.
You are installing a porous boundary at the deepest developmental level. You are literally training them to be the perfect victim for future predators.
Let's slow this down for the listener. Because when you are in the middle of these interactions, when your boss gives that unsolicited advice or your partner sighs about your migraine, it rarely feels like a calculated data-gathering operation.
Right, it just feels deeply uncomfortable.
Exactly. When someone ignores a small boundary and we feel that weird knot in our stomach, are we just making a mountain out of a molehill? Because society constantly tells us to let it go, don't be so dramatic, or they meant well.
This is where we have to fiercely validate the listener's internal instruments. The cultural narrative of don't be overly sensitive is often weaponized by toxic systems to keep victims compliant.
Wow, yes.
If a conversation leaves you feeling mysteriously drained, anxious, or if the literal hair on the back of your neck stands up, you are not being dramatic.
You're not making it up.
No, your somatic nervous system has detected a predator.
The sources mention that boundaries actually interact directly with our hormones, specifically cortisol. Can we break down the biology of that alarm system? Like, why does my stomach drop when my boundary is tested?
Because your boundaries are neurologically linked to your threat detection system. The source material from therapies like accelerated resolution therapy, or RT, highlights this somatic connection.
Okay, RT.
RT focuses on changing how the brain processes traumatic images and physical sensations. What they find is that boundaries act as the security guards for your stress levels.
So when the guard sees a threat.
Exactly. When someone probes your boundary, your amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, registers a potential threat to your autonomy. It immediately signals the adrenal glands to dump cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream.
So that tightness in the chest, that sudden nausea, that is literal cortisol flooding my system. It's a biological klaxon siren.
Precisely. Your body is preparing you to fight or flee because your perimeter has been breached.
But we usually just ignore it.
And that is the tragedy. Manipulators rely entirely on you ignoring that biological alarm. They rely on you using your rational brain to talk yourself out of what your body already knows is true.
You say, oh, he didn't mean it that way, or she's just stressed from work, I'm overreacting.
In the second you rationalize their behavior, the breach is successful.
Once that breach is successful and the manipulator knows you will yield on the small things and ignore your own alarms, they initiate a much deeper, far more complex psychological dance.
This is where it gets really dark.
They move from testing to trapping, which brings us to the hidden motivations and power objectives.
We are now descending into layers 3 and 4. This is where the long-term architecture of a toxic relationship is built.
The source material draws heavily here from Dr. Harriet Lerner's clinical framework regarding the relationship balance. She identifies two distinct, unconscious roles that people adopt to maintain equilibrium in a dysfunctional system: the overfunctioner and the underfunctioner.
Yes. In any systemic relationship, whether it's a marriage, a nuclear family, or an executive team, people will unconsciously polarize into these roles to manage anxiety.
Break down the overfunctioner first.
The overfunctioner is the person who takes charge of everything. They anticipate every problem before it happens.
Are a manager.
Right. They offer endless advice. They manage the social schedules, the finances, the emotional weather of the house. They step in to do significantly more than their fair share.
And on the surface, they appear incredibly strong, highly competent, and totally put together.
But internally, they are exhausted. They are carrying the psychological weight of the entire world, believing that if they drop a single ball, the whole system will collapse.
Meanwhile, the underfunctioner adopts the complete opposite polarity.
Exactly. They are perceived as less capable, highly disorganized, emotionally fragile, or just chronically unlucky.
So they end up on the receiving end of the overfunctioner's constant caretaking.
Yes, they appear completely dependent and helpless.
Now, here is where the clinical profiling reveals something absolutely terrifying. The sources indicate that a covert narcissist, or a highly manipulative personality, doesn't just play one of these roles. They can exploit either role as camouflage to achieve their ultimate power objective.
This is the brilliance of covert manipulation. Let's look at a covert narcissist playing the perpetual underfunctioner first.
Okay, the victim.
Right. They're always the victim of circumstances. They always have a fresh crisis. They are chronically misunderstood by their bosses, betrayed by their friends, or suffering from mysterious ailments that prevent them from contributing.
The professional victim.
Exactly. By weaponizing their helplessness, they demand constant, unwavering care, attention, and financial resources from the overfunctioner.
So they're in charge, but from the bottom.
Yes. They control the entire dynamic of the relationship, not through strength, but through a manufactured bottomless need.
Wow.
They drain the overfunctioner dry, and if the overfunctioner ever tries to stop caretaking, the manipulator accuses them of being abusive and abandoning them in their time of need.
But the manipulator can also flip the script entirely and play the overfunctioner.
Yes. In this scenario, they become the smothering, omnipotent controller.
How does that look?
They create dependency by doing literally everything for you. They insist on managing your finances because, you aren't good with numbers. They isolate you from your friends by claiming they are the only one who truly understands what's best for you.
So they're slowly convincing you that you are fundamentally incompetent.
Exactly. Making you believe you cannot possibly survive the real world without their hyper-competent guidance.
So the power objective remains exactly the same in both scenarios: total control and complete dependency. But the camouflage changes based on whatever role the victim is most susceptible to. Precisely.
And when the victim, whether they are the exhausted overfunctioner tired of doing everything, or the smothered underfunctioner trying to breathe, when they finally attempt to assert a boundary, they almost always step on a psychological landmine.
They fall directly into what the clinical literature calls the JE trap.
The JD trap.
Yes, and this concept is a massive paradigm shift for anyone dealing with a toxic personality. JDE is an acronym that stands for justify, argue, defend, and explain.
Now, I want to push back on this concept hard because when I read this in the sources, it challenged everything our society teaches us about healthy communication.
I know, it goes against everything we learn.
Right. From kindergarten, we are taught to use our words. We are told that communication is the key to resolving all conflicts. If you just explain your perspective clearly, logically, and calmly, the other person will understand where you are coming from.
That's the deal.
So you're telling me that by explaining to my mother why I can't fly home for Thanksgiving, I am actually making the abuse worse. You are not just making it worse. You are playing a rigged game designed entirely for you to lose.
Why? If I have a valid, logical reason, why wouldn't I share it?
Because you are operating under a catastrophic illusion. You are projecting your own healthy psychological framework onto a predator.
Okay, unpack that.
You believe that their objection to your boundary is based on a lack of logical data. You think, if I just provide the right data, Mom, I'm working 60 hours a week, the baby has an ear infection and flights are $1,000, she will process that data, experience empathy, and say, oh, sweetheart, I understand, stay home and rest.
But that never, ever happens.
It never happens Because the manipulator does not want your explanation. They do not care about your data. They want your compliance.
Wow.
JDE is the trap you fall into when you mistakenly believe the logic of your case can alter their demand for control.
So, by carefully explaining myself and listing my reasons, what am I actually communicating to them on a behavioral level?
By justifying and explaining your boundary, you are implicitly communicating that they have the authority to approve or deny your boundary.
Wait, say that again.
You are legitimizing their right to interrogate your choices. You are treating your fundamental right to say no as if it were a negotiation.
It's like pouring gasoline on a fire while mistakenly thinking it's water. You think you're putting out the argument, but you are handing them the exact fuel they need to keep the conflict burning.
It is the perfect analogy, because the moment you provide a reason, you give them an obstacle to overcome.
Right.
If you say, I can't come because flights are too expensive, the manipulator doesn't hear a boundary. They hear, if I offer to pay for the flights, you'll have no excuse left, and you will be forced to comply.
You've given them a puzzle to solve rather than a door that is locked.
Exactly. You defend your parenting style, they will argue against your specific points using cherry-picked articles. You justify your career pivot, they will tear down your financial logic.
It's exhausting.
As long as you are JDE, you are trapped in the dance, and they are consuming your energy.
So what is the tactical alternative to the JDE trap?
The alternative is a flat declarative statement, I won't be able to make it to Thanksgiving this year. Full stop. No reasons, no apologies, absolute silence.
I can feel my own stomach knotting up just imagining saying that. That feels incredibly unnatural and terrifying.
It feels terrifying because it violates the deepest survival programming installed in your brain during childhood.
Which brings us to the dark, beating heart of this entire investigation. To truly understand why we are so prone to falling into the JD trap, why we feel a compulsive need to over-explain ourselves, and why simply saying no triggers a biological fear of death, we have to dig down into the developmental roots.
We have to look at where this faulty operating system was originally installed.
We are moving into layers 5 and 6, unconscious psychological drivers and developmental origins. This takes us directly into family systems theory.
The foundational text here revolves around the concept of the enmeshed family system.
Okay, define enmeshed for us.
The clinical literature defines an enmeshed family as a system where family members are emotionally fused together in a highly toxic, codependent web.
Like a hive mind.
Exactly. There is an absolute lack of emotional, psychological, and often physical boundaries.
In a healthy family system, the ultimate goal of parenting is individuation, right?
Yeah.
You are raising a child to eventually become a separate, fully autonomous adult with their own beliefs, values, and life path.
Yes, that's the healthy model. But in an enmeshed system run by a toxic or narcissistic parent, individuation is viewed as an act of profound betrayal.
They don't want you to be independent.
The system demands that everyone think, feel, and act the exact same way.
Uniqueness is punished as treason.
Correct. The narcissistic parent views the family not as a group of individuals, but as a single organism that exists solely to regulate the parent's fragile self-esteem.
So they use their kids to regulate their own emotions.
Exactly. And to maintain this delicate ecosystem, the parent unconsciously assigns rigid survival roles to the children.
The sources outline these designated roles, and they are universally recognized in the trauma community. Let's break them down. First, you have the golden child.
The golden child is an extension of the narcissistic parent's idealized self. They can do no wrong.
They're the trophy.
Right. Their achievements are entirely co-opted by the parent to prove to the outside world how wonderful the family is. But the golden child is under immense pressure. They know that the parent's love is entirely conditional on their perfection and their absolute compliance.
Then you have the dark mirror of the golden child, the scapegoat.
Ah, the scapegoat. This is the receptacle for all the family's dysfunction and toxicity. Whenever the narcissistic parent feels internal shame, anger, or inadequacy, they project it entirely onto the scapegoat.
So the scapegoat is blamed for literally everything that goes wrong.
Everything. They're labeled the problem child, the difficult one, the rebel.
But the irony is,
ironically, the scapegoat is often the only person in the family who sees the dysfunction clearly, and they are punished severely for speaking the truth.
And finally, you have the flying monkeys.
Named after the obedient servants of the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz.
Perfect name for it.
Flying monkeys are the enablers. They're usually other family members who enforce the toxic parent's will.
So if you try to set a boundary with the toxic parent,
the parent will send the flying monkeys to guilt trip you, harass you, and drag you back into the enmeshed web. They will say things like, "You know how your mother gets, just apologize and keep the peace."
They are essentially demanding that you set yourself on fire to keep the toxic parent warm, just because they don't want to deal with the parent's wrath either.
Exactly.
And what is so insidious is how society is deeply complicit in maintaining these structures.
Society reinforces it constantly.
The cultural pressure is immense. We hear it all the time. Blood is thicker than water. But she's your mother. You only get one family. You have to forgive them. Society actively weaponizes the concept of family loyalty to force victims to endure gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and profound boundary violations simply because they share DNA with the perpetrator.
And this brings us to the unconscious psychological drivers that form the victim's adult operating system. Think about what happens to a highly neuroplastic child's brain when a parent responds to their natural, healthy independence with rage,
Or with a devastating days-long silent treatment.
or by emotionally collapsing, crying, and playing the victim.
The child's brain learns a terrifying, visceral lesson. They learn that authenticity, being their true self, expressing an actual need, directly threatens their attachment to their caregiver.
And for a mammalian child, attachment is not a luxury. Attachment equals biological survival. If your caregiver abandons you, you die.
Exactly. If a young child asserts a boundary like saying, "I don't want to play piano anymore," and the parent withdraws their love and approval, the child experiences that not as a minor disagreement, but as a literal life or death crisis.
To survive that environment, the child does something heartbreaking. They amputate parts of their own personality. They learn to meticulously shape themselves into whatever shape is most convenient for the volatile adults around them. They develop hypervigilance, constantly scanning the micro-expressions of their parents, trying to anticipate their needs and moods just to prevent an explosion.
So what does this mean for us as adults walking around the world today? If we grew up in this enmeshed system, are we just unconsciously projecting the faces of our overly demanding parents onto our bosses, our friends, and our romantic partners?
In the vast majority of unresolved trauma cases, yes. That childhood survival mechanism becomes your default adult operating system.
You become a chronic people pleaser, terrified of conflict.
You fundamentally confuse love with the experience of having your boundaries tested, ignored, and violated, because that is what love felt like growing up. You unconsciously seek out partners and environments that feel familiar to your nervous system, even if they are deeply toxic.
There is a specific insight in the source material from trauma expert Shahida Arabi that give me absolute chills. She discusses how trauma survivors, because of this conditioning, utilize a wait-and-see tactic when they encounter red flags.
Yes, the wait-and-see hesitation, because the survivor's internal alarm system was systematically dismantled in childhood, because they were constantly told they were crazy or too sensitive for noticing the abuse, they no longer trust their own perceptions.
Right.
So when an adult partner or boss crosses a boundary, instead of immediately enforcing a consequence, the survivor freezes. They wait.
They second-guess themselves.
They rationalize. Maybe I misunderstood their tone. Let me give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to overreact and ruin the relationship.
And Arabi points out that this wait-and-see hesitation leaves them wide open to secondary attacks. The predator relies entirely on that hesitation.
It creates a crucial window of opportunity for them. While the victim is paralyzed by self-doubt, analyzing whether the abuse was bad enough to warrant a response, the manipulator is rapidly establishing control.
Moving the goalposts.
Exactly, and solidifying their dominance before the victim even fully realizes a war has started.
This constant, chronic suppression of the self, this endless hypervigilance and people-pleasing, it doesn't just evaporate into the ether. It doesn't disappear just because you try to ignore it.
No, it goes directly into the body.
It lodges itself deeply in the physical body and the architecture of the mind. It exacts a massive, devastating toll. Let's look at the terrifying symptoms of a completely breached boundary system. This is layer 7, the somatic toll and the 10 symptoms of violation.
When you live with porous boundaries for years, when you are subjected to the slow drip of covert manipulation and coercive control, your entire psychological and physical infrastructure begins to buckle.
The clinical literature, drawn from trauma studies and narcissistic abuse recovery, points to 10 specific debilitating symptoms.
And we really need to dissect every single one of these 10 symptoms meticulously, because I guarantee listeners are going to recognize these patterns in themselves, their past relationships, or people they love.
Let's do it. The first, and perhaps most profound, is dissociation.
Dissociation is the brain's ultimate survival mechanism. It's a psychological anesthetic.
How does it work in real time?
When your physical or emotional space is being continuously violated, and your brain determines that fighting back or fleeing is too dangerous, perhaps because the abuser controls your finances or because it's a parent you depend on, the brain chooses to internally detach.
You just check out.
You literally check out of reality. You might stare blankly during an argument, feeling as though you were floating above your body, watching the abuse happen to someone else. You tell yourself, just endure this, go to a happy place, it will be over soon.
The tragic result is that the victim becomes entirely disconnected from their own reality. They might not even remember the details of the abuse later.
Which makes them highly susceptible to gaslighting when the manipulator says, that never happened, you're imagining things.
Symptom number 2 is martyrdom, or what the sources describe as identifying entirely with victimhood.
This occurs when the victim's locus of control becomes completely externalized.
To explain that clinical term, your locus of control is your core belief about who steers your life. An internal locus of control means you believe you are the driver.
Right, but an external locus of control means you fundamentally believe life is something that just happens to you, and you are powerless to change it.
So they accept victimization.
They accept it as an inescapable identity. They might actually lean into the suffering, using their martyrdom as a bizarre shield.
Like, look how broken I am.
The subconscious logic is, if I am already destroyed, and I broadcast how broken I am, maybe the predator will take pity on me and stop attacking. It is a way of making the abuse predictable.
Symptom number 3 is invisibility. This one is absolutely heartbreaking to me. It is the active, intentional shrinking of the self.
The logic of invisibility is pure survival mathematics. If you cannot be seen, you cannot be targeted. The victim stops expressing any opinions. They stop wearing clothes that draw attention. They agree with whatever movie the group wants to watch, whatever restaurant the partner wants to go
They
to.
just erase themselves.
If you have no preferences, no distinct personality, and no desires, you provide no surface area for the manipulator to attack. You erase your own existence to survive.
Which brings us to symptom 4, which often happens on the flip side of the dynamic, smothering.
Smothering is the experience of weaponized care.
Weaponized care.
Yes, this is the boundary violation of the over-functioning manipulator. They intrude on every aspect of your life under the guise of being helpful.
Like cleaning your room when you ask them not to.
Or intervening in your professional conflicts, or buying you clothes you don't like and insisting you wear them. It feels like you are being suffocated by a heavy blanket.
You feel strangled, lacking the basic psychological oxygen to breathe and make your own mistakes.
Symptom 5 is chronic hypervigilance.
Where your nervous system's radar is permanently jammed in the on position.
Exactly. You are constantly reading the emotional weather of the room. You listen to the specific cadence of your partner's footsteps coming up the stairs to gauge if they are angry.
You obsessively analyze the punctuation in a text message from your boss.
Your brain is burning an astronomical amount of calories trying to predict the future to avoid conflict, leaving you completely exhausted.
And that exhaustion leads directly to symptom 6. Decision paralysis, and extreme indecisiveness.
When you have been punished repeatedly for making the wrong choice, or when your choices have been endlessly criticized by a manipulator, you eventually stop choosing.
Deciding what to eat for dinner becomes a terrifying ordeal.
Because you fear the hidden consequences, you defer all decision-making to others, which further cements your dependency on the manipulator.
Symptom 7 is toxic guilt.
This is the internalized voice of the manipulator. Long after the abuser has left the room, their programming remains.
You feel guilty for taking a nap when you are sick.
You feel guilty for spending your own money. You feel guilty for merely existing and taking up space. It is a fabricated debt that can never, ever be repaid.
Symptom 8 is where it gets highly medical. Severe somatic deterioration, the body keeping the score.
The clinical data linking emotional abuse to physical illness is undeniable. We are talking about chronic, unexplained somatic pain.
Like
Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, severe gastrointestinal issues like IBS, chronic migraines, autoimmune flare-ups.
Because your system is flooded with cortisol.
When your nervous system is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline for years on end, the physical hardware of your body begins to break down under the toxic load. Your immune system degrades.
Symptom 9 is compulsive justification. This is the hangover of the JDE trap.
The victim loses the ability to simply state a fact. They will preemptively offer 3 paragraphs of explanation for why they are 5 minutes late. even if the other person didn't notice or care.
They're constantly building legal defense cases for their everyday actions because they expect to be interrogated at any moment.
And finally, symptom 10, profound identity atrophy.
This is the ultimate victory of the manipulator.
It is. The victim reaches a point where they genuinely do not know who they are anymore. If you ask them, what are your hobbies? What brings you joy? What do you value? They draw a complete blank
Their entire identity has been hollowed out.
and replaced by the needs and demands of the toxic system. They are a ghost haunting their own life.
The tension in this analysis has peaked. I mean, the listener has now seen the invisible architecture. They understand the porous vulnerabilities. They recognize the covert testing data gathering. They see the absolute futility of the JDE trap. They comprehend the enmeshed family origins. And they are staring at the devastating physical and psychological toll of a breached nervous system.
We have diagnosed the disease with forensic precision.
The question now is, how do we rewrite this corrupted operating system? How do we surgically remove the predator and take our power back? We have reached layer 8, tactical enforcement and the operating manual.
This is where we move from profiling the problem to executing the solution. And it begins with a fundamental, earth-shattering perspective shift regarding what a boundary actually is.
Let's lay it out. Destroy the misconception.
Most people believe a boundary is an attempt to control the other person's behavior. They think a boundary sounds like, you are not allowed to yell at me anymore, or you cannot text me after 9 p.m.
Right. We think we are establishing a new set of rules for the other person to follow.
And that is exactly why boundaries fail, because you cannot control the manipulator. A predator will simply look at your rule and break it just to prove they have power over you.
So what is a real boundary?
A true clinical boundary has absolutely nothing to do with controlling their behavior.
Right.
A true boundary is entirely about controlling your response when they inevitably cross the line. It is a predetermined, actionable protocol for your own behavior.
So it's not, you are not allowed to yell at me. A true boundary is, if you raise your voice at me, I will immediately hang up the phone and block your number for 24 hours.
Exactly. The boundary is your action. The boundary is the locked door, not the request that the burglar stay off the porch. You are no longer requiring their compliance. You are relying solely on your own execution.
So how do we execute this tactically in the real world against highly manipulative people? The sources provide some elite behavioral methodologies. Let's start with the Gray Rock method and then look at BIFF communication.
The Gray Rock method is an essential survival tool for dealing with individuals who possess dark triad traits, or NPD, especially when you cannot go completely no contact, like if you share custody of a child or they are your immediate supervisor.
Narcissists feed on your emotional reactions, right?
They do. They want to see you angry, defensive, crying in frustration, or begging for their understanding. That emotional output proves to them that they hold the puppet strings.
So how do we cut the strings?
You become the most uninteresting, unresponsive, boring object in their environment. You become a gray rock. When they try to provoke you with a passive-aggressive comment, you show absolutely zero emotion. Your face goes blank. You offer single-word answers. Okay. Understood.
You do not jade.
You do not jade. You do not explain your feelings. You literally starve them of the emotional calories they are trying to consume. Eventually, the predator gets bored and wanders off to find an easier target that provides a higher emotional yield.
And what about written communication? The literature highlights BIFF.
BIF is an acronym designed for emails and texts with hostile, manipulative people. It stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm.
Okay, let's say you are dealing with a toxic ex-partner who sends you a 3-page email filled with accusations, insults, and a single question about picking up the kids.
The instinct is to reply to every single accusation and defend your character.
Which is exactly what they want. You are stepping right into the JD trap.
Instead, you use BIFF, brief. You get to reply to 2 sentences. Informative. You strip out all emotion and provide only the logistical data required.
Friendly. Why friendly?
Friendly means you maintain a terrifyingly polite, neutral tone, which deprives them of the ability to claim you are being hostile. And firm. You state your position and close the door to any further negotiation. Your reply is simply, "Thanks for reaching out. I will be at the designated spot at 5 p.m. on Friday to pick up the kids. Have a good week."
It is incredibly clinical. I read that section and thought, why on earth are we being friendly to an abuser? But it's not about being nice, it's about tactical neutrality.
Exactly. It is tactical armor. You are removing every single molecule of oxygen from the fire. You give them absolutely nothing to grab onto.
The sources also provide specific therapist scripts that you can keep in your back pocket for live conversations. I found one from Camber Mental Health that is just brilliant. It goes like this. I value our relationship, but I need to set a boundary here.
The architecture of that sentence is a masterclass in psychological judo.
Judah.
Yes, because it begins with a validation clause. I value our relationship. This immediately disarms the manipulator's initial defensive reflex. They cannot accuse you of hating them or attacking them.
But the sentence immediately pivots to an uncompromising structural limit. But I need to set a boundary here.
It leverages just enough therapist speak to completely short-circuit the manipulator's brain. They don't know how to argue against the abstract concept of a boundary without looking openly abusive. And because you haven't given them a specific reason to attack, they are left swinging at the air.
Another crucial internal tactic is radical detachment. This is the antidote to gaslighting. Gaslighting is when the manipulator tries to rewrite your reality, telling you that you are crazy, that you are misremembering events, or that you are inherently selfish for having needs.
Detachment means severing the need for them to validate your reality.
How do you do that?
Detachment means you mentally walk away from the debate. You tell yourself, this person is entirely committed to a distorted, fictional narrative that serves their ego. They are allowed to hold that incorrect opinion, but I am under absolutely zero obligation to accept their fiction as my reality.
You surrender the exhausting desire to convince them of the truth.
Yes.
Let's talk about the final piece of the puzzle. Enforcing consequences. Dr. Henry Cloud's principles on this are vital. He points out the massive difference between a request and an actual boundary.
This is where most people fail.
If I say, please don't call me after 9 p.m., that is a request. If they call at 9:30 p.m. and I answer the phone and I spend 20 minutes talking to them while complaining that they called late, I didn't set a boundary, I just complained while complying.
A boundary without an enforced consequence is just a suggestion. And to a manipulator, a suggestion is an invitation to trample you.
Cloud says that consequences must be natural, not arbitrary. And here's the profound behavioral insight. To enforce a consequence effectively, we must remove the desirable rather than adding a punishment.
Explain the behavioral mechanics of that distinction.
Let's say you have a partner who is chronically, disrespectfully late, ruining your evening plans constantly. Adding a punishment, or what you called a chore, would be yelling at them when they finally arrive or giving them the silent treatment in the car.
That requires a massive expenditure of your own emotional energy. You are doing the work.
Removing the desirable means you state your boundary. I will wait for 15 minutes. If you aren't here, I am taking my car and going to the restaurant without you. The desirable asset in this scenario is your company, your time, and your energy.
When the 15 minutes pass, you simply leave.
You remove their access to yourself, which requires zero screaming, zero arguing, and far less monitoring energy on your part. It forces the manipulator to experience the natural friction and consequences of their own behavior without you playing the role of the over-functioning manager.
But here is where we must issue the final critical warning. Let me play the role of the terrified listener and push back on this entire operating manual.
Okay, do it.
Because I am listening to this and I am realizing that if I actually execute this, if I stop playing the underfunctioner, if I completely refuse to JDE, if I turn into a gray rock, and if I start ruthlessly enforcing consequences, won't the manipulator just explain? Won't things get exponentially worse?
This is the most vital moment of revelation in the entire journey of taking your power back.
Yes.
They will get furiously angry. Things will absolutely get worse before they get better. And you have to expect it like you expect the sun to rise.
In family systems theory, this reaction is known as change-back pressure. In clinical behavioral psychology, it is called an extinction burst.
An extinction burst.
When you alter your behavior and remove the compliance they have relied on, the toxic system will not applaud your newfound health. They will actively, aggressively go to war to break your new boundaries.
Because they realize their master key doesn't work in your lock anymore.
Exactly. Think of a lab rat that has been trained to press a lever to get a food pellet. One day, the scientists turn off the machine, the rat presses the lever, and no food comes out.
Does the rat rationally say, the machine is broken, I'll go do something else?
No. The rat goes berserk. It mashes the lever 50 times a second. It bites the lever. It attacks the cage. That is an extinction burst. It is a temporary, violent escalation in the frequency and intensity of a behavior when the expected reward is suddenly removed.
So what does that look like in the human manipulator?
When you stop complying, they will jiggle the handle harder. Then they will try to kick the door down. They will test you more aggressively than ever before.
Tantrums.
Massive adult tantrums. They will deploy intense passive aggression. They will recruit flying monkeys to smear your reputation, guilt trip you. They will escalate the psychological warfare to terrifying heights to force you to surrender and revert back to your old compliant role.
Because the old system served their ego perfectly. But knowing the behavioral science behind this, knowing that the extinction burst is coming, is the ultimate armor.
It changes everything. Because when the tantrum happens, instead of collapsing into guilt or feeling terrified that you have ruined the relationship, you can detach.
You can observe their meltdown forensically, like a scientist.
You can sit back and say to yourself, there it is. There is the extinction burst. The system is resisting, which means my boundary is actually working.
You transform from a helpless victim reacting to chaotic abuse into a master profiler observing a highly predictable psychological pattern.
And if you can hold the line, if you do not yield during the extinction burst, the negative behavior will eventually extinguish. The manipulator will realize that the structural integrity of your boundary is impenetrable. The lever is permanently broken.
At that point, they will either be forced to adjust their behavior to respect your autonomy, or they will abandon the relationship entirely to seek out a softer target with porous boundaries.
Either way, you win. The parasite is removed. Your psychological architecture is secure.
A boundary only becomes real in the exact moment you execute the consequence. Prior to that, it is merely a theory. This has been an absolutely staggering, comprehensive journey. Let's synthesize the massive ground we've covered today. We started by identifying the hidden architecture of vulnerability, how porous, soft, and spongy boundaries invite predators into our lives by offering no resistance. We exposed the covert testing phase, dissecting the migraine scenario to show exactly how guilt is weaponized as a data-gathering tool to establish dominance.
We dismantled the insidious JD trap, realizing that explaining ourselves to a predator is like throwing gasoline on a fire. We trace these vulnerabilities back to their deep developmental origins in enmeshed family systems, where we learn the tragic lesson that authenticity must be traded for survival.
We stared unflinchingly at the severe somatic toll, the 10 symptoms ranging from disassociation and extreme indecision to the physical deterioration of a nervous system flooded by cortisol. And finally, we armed you with the tactical operating manual, the gray rock method, BIFF communication, radical detachment, and the psychological armor required to weather the storm of the extinction burst.
The overarching, undeniable truth of this entire deep dive is this: honoring your own internal alarms, paying attention to your somatic signals, and enforcing rigid limits against manipulators is not an act of selfishness, cruelty, or betrayal.
No.
It is the fundamental, non-negotiable architecture of your own identity.
Setting a boundary is the ultimate declaration of self. It is looking the manipulator in the eye and saying, I exist, I have limits, and my psychological well-being is no longer acceptable collateral damage for your comfort.
To close our profiling session today, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over in the days ahead. We talked at the very beginning about that lingering feeling of guilt, of being drained, of walking on invisible eggshells around certain people.
Right.
I want you to consider the specific people in your life who consistently label you as difficult, harsh, unforgiving, or mean in the exact moments when you simply say no. I want you to look at them closely.
Are they actually upset about your tone of voice? Are they truly offended by your phrasing?
Or are they actively, aggressively mourning the loss of their unmitigated control over you?
Wow.
The next time someone accuses you of being selfish for establishing a healthy limit, do not JDE, do not justify, do not explain. Just pause, observe their reaction forensically, and ask yourself one simple question: what invisible transaction are they trying to force me into right now?